What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live and in living color from the Radio What Studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, where do you go? DJLittleRock.com, DJLittleRock.com. Check availability and get a free price quote. And maybe you can have me at your next event. And you can sing for me. Yeah, I do karaoke shows too. Weddings and parties and corporate events and all that kind of stuff. All the usual stuff you'd want some good music playing at. You know, I conform to you. I become who you want me to be. I'll play the music you want me to play. I'll be the entertainer that you want me to be. I conform to you. Speaking of you, if you would like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. But for today, let's learn together on What Makes You Smarter. Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 quotes famous people never actually said. You've seen it before. That photograph of Gandhi, Marilyn Monroe, or Abraham Lincoln juxtaposed with a pithy saying that seems just like something they'd have come up with. Well, in many cases, those phrases are just a little too good to be true. Here are 10 cases where the famous saying and its supposed author don't match up. Number 1, a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. Not Gloria Steinem. A few variants on this phrase exist. Most notably, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. This saying is often attributed to feminist writer Gloria Steinem or sometimes Erica Jong. Neither is correct. The modern incarnation of the phrase first appeared on a bathroom wall in Australia. Devoted researchers on the quote investigator website have traced germs of the saying even earlier to the 19th century American newspapers, who ran various lines comparing democracy without whiskey, fish without water, and women without husbands. All were bad. Later, the phrase, a fish without a bicycle, was connected satirically to the idea of a man without religion. The Australian social activist Irina Dunn has taken credit for the modern phrase, saying she scrawled it in at least 2 bathroom walls in Australia in 1970. Number 2, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Not Nelson Mandela. Anti-apartheid hero and former South African president Nelson Mandela never said this. The phrase originated with Marianne Williamson, the New Age guru and erstwhile 2020 presidential candidate, according to quote investigator. The phrase first appeared in Chapter 7 of Williamson's 1992 bestseller, A Return to Love, Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles. The full quote is, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. Some people find the lines inspiring, but there's no connection with Mandela. In fact, it's not quite clear how the statesman was given credit, except that people think it's the kind of thing he might have said. Quote number 3, people who like this sort of thing will find this sort of thing they like. Not Abraham Lincoln. It's a very diplomatic phrase, but Lincoln never said it. Quote investigator traced the expression to 19th century humorist Charles Farrar Brown, also known as Artemus Ward. In 1863, Brown created a series of fake testimonials for some lectures he was performing, including a fictitious blurb from one O. Abe. This Abe supposedly said, quote, "I have never heard any of your lectures, but from what I can learn, I should say that for people who like the kind of lectures you deliver, they are just the kind of lectures such people like," end quote. The testimonial was reprinted in multiple places, and versions of the saying became associated with Lincoln. Later on, a story arose that Brown had read a lecture to Lincoln, who responded with a version of the phrase. Later still, Brown's name was dropped from the situation entirely. The writers George Bernard Shaw, Max Beardbaum, and Muriel Spark have all used the phrase, but long after it was already circulating. By the way, other things Lincoln never said include, quote, "In the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years," end quote. And, quote, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power," end quote, among many other examples. The number 4 quote on this list: "Be the change you wish to see in the world, not Gandhi." It's a lovely saying, but it wasn't Gandhi. He did say something similar, quote, "If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. We need not wait to see what others do," end quote. According to Quote Investigator, the more succinct version of the phrase doesn't start appearing until the mid-1970s, decades after Gandhi's death. Quote number 5, "Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Not Mark Twain." It's funny enough that it seems like Twain could have said it, but he didn't. The man born Samuel Langhorne Clemens did have some funny quips about the weather, though including the following, quote, "I reverently believe that the Maker who made us all makes everything in New England but the weather. I don't know who makes that, but I think it must be raw apprentices in the weather clerk's factory who experiment and learn how in New England for board and clothes, and they are promoted to make weather for countries that require a good article and will take their custom elsewhere if they don't get it," end quote. Other funny things Mark Twain didn't say include, quote, "Be careful about reading health books. You may die of a misprint," end quote. And, quote, "There are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics," end quote. Quote number 6, "Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, not Freud." Although Freud was often pictured smoking a cigar, he never actually said this. According to Quote Investigator, the line first appears in the medical journal Psychiatry in 1950, where it's attributed as a, quote, "famous remark," end quote, of Freud's, but it wasn't. Number 7 on the list of famous quotes people never actually said: "Let them eat cake, not Marie Antoinette." Despite the stories that have circulated about her for centuries, like the one saying she delivered this line after being told the peasants had no bread, Marie Antoinette wasn't a frivolous bimbo. In fact, she was smart, sensitive, and charitable, according to her biographer, Lady Antonia Fraser. Fraser and others have noted that versions of this line existed long before Antoinette's birth. The tale was first told about Spanish Princess Marie Therese, who married Louis XIV in 1660. She supposedly suggested that the French people eat, quote, "la croûte de pâté," end quote, or, quote, "the crust of the pâté," end quote. Other royals were connected to the story over the years, and philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau made the line famous in his 1766 Confessions, but he attributed it to, quote, "a great princess," end quotes, not one in specific. Quote number 8 on this list goes like this: "Give a girl the right shoes and she can conquer the world," not Marilyn Monroe. Monroe is credited with a number of popular sayings that appear next to her iconic image on Tumblr, Facebook, Pinterest, etc. It seems fairly clear that the credit for this one should actually go to Bette Midler, although she didn't use those exact words. According to, quote, Investigator, the original phrasing appeared in a newspaper supplement called Family Weekly in 1980, which included a section where ordinary people could ask questions of celebrities. Midler was asked, quote, is it true you really have a passion for shoes? If so, what kind do you prefer? End quote. She responded, quote, the spike-heeled kind. They're not always easy to find. I firmly believe that with the right footwear, one can rule the world. Fortunately for the world, I have not found the correct footwear to achieve that goal. However, shoe stores across the nation can attest to my sincere and persistent efforts in that direction. End quote. Quote number 9. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Not Albert Einstein. Einstein might have agreed with the statement, but he didn't say it. Quote Investigator suggests crediting sociologist William Bruce Cameron, who wrote in 1963, tome, it would be nice if all of the data which sociologists require could be enumerated, because then we could run them through IBM machines and draw charts as the economists do. However, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted, end quote. There's no reference to Einstein saying it until 1986, more than 3 decades after his death. And the number 10 quote on this list, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Not Voltaire. The famous French philosopher Voltaire, born François-Marie Arouet, died in 1778. But this saying surfaced in the early 20th century. It first appears in a 1906 book called The Friends of Voltaire, and describes Voltaire's attitude to a situation, not something he actually said. According to, quote, Investigator, the historian Evelyn Beatrice Hall, writing as S.G. Tallentire, wrote about a kerfuffle over a controversial text, De l'Esprit, on the Mind, which was banned and publicly burned. Voltaire was no fan of the book, but thought the response was a bit much. As Hall tells it, quote, what a fuss about an omelet, Voltaire had exclaimed when he heard of the burning. How abominably unjust to persecute a man for such an airy trifle as that. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, was his attitude now, end quote. The fact that Hall enclosed the line in quotation marks makes it seem like something Voltaire said. But as Hall later made clear in her letters, it was a, quote, Voltairean principle, end quote, not his own exact words. Well, that was a fun look into 10 quotes famous people never actually said. Have you ever been misquoted? Drop me a line. Email me, info@radiowhat.com. That's it for this installment of What Makes You Smarter. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. It's Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at SmarterWhat, and YouTube. Username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me radio.com/KeysDan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.